Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever inaugural episode of Growth Engineering Podcast. I'm your host, Dima Popov, co-founder at Tommy.ai, and my co-host and also the guest for our today's show, Bala Vishal, go-to-market consultant and engineering-focused marketing leader. We know each other for a few months, and every once in a while we get together and just discuss how the world of marketing and demand generation should be thinking more in engineering terms. And that's why we decided to start this podcast. Bala, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. There's a lot more about growth. People talk about growth hacking, people talk about growth marketing. This growth word has taken different forms and shapes within the startup world. But I think we both agree that you could say engineering has a lot more to do with growth. And it's not just hardcore engineering, be it electrical or mechanical, but about the mindset that engineers normally have, which is the why questions that engineers ask is very different than the why questions marketers ask. So it's combining that question is kind of where I see the goal of this podcast is. And how do we train marketers or the growth marketers to start thinking like engineers, but still be the marketing powerhouses that they are?
It's interesting that you mentioned that. And I noticed that you have actually 2 degrees in engineering. Both your bachelor's and master's degrees are in engineering. So my first question is, how do you think this education background, this engineering focused background, influenced your thinking as a marketer?
Yeah, so essentially, because just to give you a backdrop, my movement into marketing was actually by, I could say, by the grace of recruiters. No one wanted me in engineering. That is why I ended up being a marketer.
Okay.
And they told me I'm a better marketer. But over the years, what I realized is the kind of questions that I was asking as an engineer were more business oriented. And that business oriented questions is what led me to marketing. But now, as a marketer, when I start putting on my technical hat, on my engineering hat, some of the why questions, you got to keep asking those why questions to a point where you feel like you have enough insights that you can actually go and do some action on. And that essentially is where I can see the engineering mindset behind marketing. The other thing outside of the why question is the other thing is the framework, because a lot of engineers, most engineers will be working with a framework, like a proper, you could say, a tight-knit process on what comes after next, then a certain set of steps that needs to be done. I think those frameworks and steps are also important in marketing, because as we all know, marketing is a pure science as well in some sense. It's not just about creatives, it's just not about nice looking ads. You could say it's a lot more to it, which is the framework around it, the process, the discipline that one follows in doing marketing. So that is kind of the engineering piece around it.
Yeah, it's interesting that marketing is responsible for engineering probably the most important business outcome for any business, right? It's responsible for engineering revenue, and growth and profitability. But you mentioned all those why questions that are so common in engineering. Can you maybe give us like a practical example of what this why question might sound like in a marketing environment, and why is it important to keep asking why?
Yeah, for example, when we're talking about engineering, let's say that we are talking about a machine, I could say, and it's a machine, I could say, that they're looking to design. It's a contactless ecosystem that they're trying to design. I could say, I think the business reason behind why that machine needs to exist first needs to be understood by the engineers. But at the same time, I could say, what are the business outcomes that come out of that machine? How that machine is going to help the business move forward? Those kind of business questions is one needs to answer. But from a technical standpoint, it's like when you understand the business outcomes, how do you tie the business outcomes to the technicalities of the machine? That is where those technical why questions come. From a marketing standpoint, when we look at a marketing campaign specifically, you could say when you're looking at, let's say you're trying to launch, you could say, a campaign on LinkedIn, And when you're trying to launch a campaign on LinkedIn, firstly, why LinkedIn? Why is that the right platform to go after? Then when you're going into the nitty-gritties about the ads, you're looking about you could say the different formats of the ads. Why this format of the ad? Why this audience? Why go this niche? So these different why questions in terms of when you're looking at even from a campaign perspective, they go into the technicalities of the campaign, and that technicalities of the campaign help you uncover things that you might have overlooked or missed. Because if you had, for example, if you had not asked those why questions, you might probably have a very broad audience on LinkedIn. Instead, by asking all those why questions, you're actually narrowing down your audience, making it more niche. And as we all know, more targeted the audience on LinkedIn is, you could better is your ad performance. So I hope that
Interesting.
helps.
Interesting. And will it be typical for an engineer to ask a lot of those why questions when designing something new?
It is not typical, but at the same time, they would be typical in terms of they would be asking those questions from a more technical standpoint than from a business standpoint. So what I'm trying to come to is, as a marketer, when we ask those why questions, we have to think it from both from a technical and from a business standpoint. That is the ability or the crossover that you have from engineering over to marketing, where you have the business hat and the technical hat. Now, when it gets too technical, I throw up my hands and say, hey, I need some development help. But till such time I'm comfortable with it, that's pretty much you should keep going asking the why question. And of course, there is some point where you might get stuck. So there is nothing, no harm in asking for help.
Okay, cool. You describe yourself these days as a go-to-market consultant. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means and how you basically operate? And why would somebody hire a go-to-market consultant in the first place?
Hiring a go-to-market consultant, I think, is a bigger question. I could say when I talk about me myself being in the go-to-market space, I've done marketing for the last 16 years, and more so specifically, it is demand generation, user acquisition, which is a pseudo marketing, pseudo sales space. At the same time, it works closely with the product teams. And that's essentially what go-to-market is. A go-to-market is a combination of marketing, sales, and product, is how I see it. And at the forefront of it are demand gen marketers, or the demand gen marketers, because again, demand gen is a very newish term. You could say a lot of people now start calling it growth or other things. But essentially, as a go-to-market like a consultant, a lot of the work that I'm doing right now with early stage startups is helping them define what the basics that they should be doing today before they even get into the growth phase. Because a lot of the basics done wrong today is what leads to an issues when you're trying to scale. For example, around brand, not defining your audience, not defining your messaging, and things like that. So yeah, that is the kind of work I'm doing right now with early stage startups. But more, I could say, at some point we'll be doing more of that work with other companies.
So you mentioned demand, you mentioned go-to-market is about tying together marketing, sales, and product.
Right.
Do you see any role for customer success in defining the go-to-market motion? And basically, what are your thoughts about this notion of customer success? It's relatively new in the tech space, but it seems to be getting a lot of traction. So curious to hear what you think about this.
You hit the nail on the head again, because it's like when I talk about sales, it's like sales is not just new business. Sales is new business and existing business, and which is where customer success comes in. A lot of the go-to-market, the way I think about it is, once you land your first few customers, you analyze them and try to create categories based on those customers, and then try to expand your go-to-market. Because a lot of times when customer success is not involved, you build a one-dimensional you could go to market, which is more based on, okay, who is ready to buy, we sell to them. But instead, we need to sell to people who are not ready to buy today, but also are ready to keep buying in the future. So it's about the longevity. And in order to create that longevity is where customer success comes in.
I agree. And I believe that it's relatively basically impossible to build a thriving business that grows in the long term without actually expanding your revenue of your current customers, not just retaining them, but actually expanding your business on the back of those relationships and making sure that their success leads to more revenue for your product, Without this, there isn't market that big who can support long-term exponential growth that everybody is after, or at least was after, until recent changes in the market environment, where burning cash is no longer comme il faut anymore.
Right.
Not the right thing to do. And you also mentioned demand generation marketers being at the forefront of this go-to-market machine. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about what demand generation is to you? Do you differentiate between, for example, demand generation and demand capture? And what is, for somebody who is looking to grow their business, maybe early stage, maybe later stage business, when thinking about demand gen, what are the three things they should keep in mind thinking about this from the get-go?
Yeah, as I said, demand generation is a newish term which has come about in the last 5 to 6 years. I don't want to blame anyone, but if I have to, I would say is the Martech vendors came up with one of these names, and this is a new name in that sense. But this is an age-old practice. This is nothing new.
Interesting.
The essential piece about it, as you said, you have to create demand, you have to capture, you have to create demand, you have to nurture it, and then capture the demand. All three of them don't happen in the same cycle. Sometimes there's already demand created by someone else. It's about you capturing it. A lot of the capture stuff is all through ads, is where I see it. You could say Google AdWords is a good example of it. Targeted LinkedIn ads is also a good capture example of it. Whereas a lot of the demand create and nurture is more to do with organic stuff that we're doing, like brand building, thought leadership. That is where a lot of the demand is created. Nurture specifically also is a lot through organic and email and other channels, but it's all about create, nurture, and then capture, not in the same sequence. So from an early stage perspective, I would say a lot should be focused first on how do you create a demand for your space versus trying to just capture it. Because I've spoken to a lot of folks who try to spend a lot of money on ads and they get disappointed saying, hey, I spend X amount of dollars, but there's nothing came out of it. Because essentially as early stage or even mid stage, you are competing with the big boys. There is no space where there is no big enterprise that exists today. So if you're just trying to do demand capture, then the cost of acquisition goes down. The only way you can keep it manageable is by doing create and nurture, and at the same time creating and nurturing it in a space that is more unique to you, more unique to your brand, than trying to copy someone else. How do you guys do that at Tommy.ai?
I wish I could give you our exact recipe. How did we make it through this startup Death Valley? But the truth is we're still figuring it out. But one thing that really caught my eye lately is investment into brand and investment into getting your unique point of view out there into your target market pays compounded interest. It is always a struggle. How to prioritize finite resources, like primarily our own time as founders and early employees in the startup. And you always want to do something that will yield immediate ROI. Maybe one more cold call or one more cold email or something like that. Maybe land this one new customer. But the reality, the longer you put off and delay your demand creation and content creation activities, the more time you lose. And this compounded interest that those investments actually pay, they work for you if you start doing it early and consistently. And they work against you because you have to do a lot of catching up. And the market is basically ripe and nobody is waiting for anyone. 3 years ago, we started in the predictive marketing space. It was pretty much an open field. Maybe there was our company in the space who was claiming to do something predictive with marketing and machine learning and stuff. Now there are at least 5 companies. A lot of them raised good rounds, and it's actually pretty interesting. But I totally agree with you that it's good that you have some strong demand in the market already in defined category you could potentially capture and drive some quick wins. But without consistently building your brand, getting your unique point of view out there, making sure you position yourself in the space as someone worth listening to, not just buying from. First, you need to position yourself as somebody worth listening to. You're basically losing a lot of opportunity here, and it can come back to you in a very negative way.
Yeah, no, you're right, and that's where it goes back to, you can't create demand unless you have defined your brand, your audience, and messaging in some sense. And unless that is defined, and again, there's no perfect formula saying this is written in stone, but you need to start somewhere. You need to document that. You need to socialize that, get it out in the market, test it out, and then keep iterating on it.
One final question, Bala, before we wrap this up. So if you were to condense all of your experience to give maybe just one advice to somebody looking to grow their business and engineer successful growth, what would it be? What would you recommend them to focus on based on your unique experience and your engineering marketing leader perspective?
I think the one thing I would say is, don't try to hack growth, because hacking growth is not sustainable.
Okay.
So do the basics right. The basics might take some extra time, but that time is well spent, because that well spent time will help you get growth in the long term.
So basically focus on building this machine,
Yeah.
not try to, I don't know, hijack somebody else's car.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah. When I hear terms like growth hacking and stuff, I cringe, because I feel like there's nothing called as hacking there. This is pure hard work. And if you don't put the time and effort, no amount of hack can get you there.
Yeah, I think that's a very inspiring message. Bala, thank you for being our first guest on our mutual podcast here. And thank you everyone who is watching this. And hope to see you again soon, hopefully next week.
Absolutely. Thank you all. See you all again.
That's it. Cheers.